you, Howard. Appreciate it. I guess before I get started on this presentation, I do want to put a plug in there for Andy and MDOT. They really have devoted a lot of free effort to supporting this national metrics program. So I think it's great that they're willing to do that. I'll tell you the other thing I would point out that there's two really good things that remember from the MDOT lessons. One is the value of having somebody like Andy in your organization. A fleet manager needs a lot of skills, people skills, skills in terms of communications and so on and so forth. Not every fleet manager needs to be a data expert, but every fleet manager needs to have a data expert available to them, because I can tell you right now it makes the world a whole lot nicer when you've got someone that can understands this stuff and keep up on it. So for what it's worth, my plug for the day is if you don't have someone like Andy on your staff, you don't know what you're missing. It really allows you to leverage your systems and your information. And the other thing I would say about this stuff is that when you don't implement fleet systems very often, but when you do, it's a wonderful time to address a lot of your performance reporting requirements, as well as to try to figure out your performance measures. I know I'm currently working in two DOTs that are implementing fleet systems, and these performance measures that Andy was talking about, it is easy when you're at that point of the process to set up your system so that those just push a button and get these reports. Of course, I think especially if you got a good analyst, he can. Right now, I'm seeing more and more people use BI reporting and so on and so forth. But all it really does is it just allows it to reach in and grab that data and report. So anyway, enough for my plug show for the performance metrics. That is something that's near and dear to my heart. I will warn you up front, this presentation is a little different, certainly very different from the ones I gave a couple of days ago. This is more informational for you. This is providing some background. This is a presentation that I actually updated, but it was originally presented at the AASHTO conference in Washington, D.C. last summer. It was when this NEVI was still very new, but I think I have updated some information in here, and I think it's something you should be familiar with or be aware of, because I suspect that it will touch you in some way and somehow. In some cases directly. I'm aware of at least one DOT fleet manager who's been directly involved in this. So without any further prattling, let me just dive into this thing. NEVI, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. This is, I think most of us should remember, I guess it was almost 2 years ago, the Congress finally passed a new transportation bill, the bilateral infrastructure legislation, the BIL. The NEVI program was part of that BIL legislation, and this presentation is really going to talk about that this NEVI formula program, and essentially what does it mean for your state, if not necessarily for you directly. And the reason I say that it may, just depending on the state, as we've seen that some DOT fleet managers it may be years before you see anything directly impact you, but you need to be at least aware of this and knowledgeable of this program. Others may get involved in it pretty quickly in terms of grant writing and so on and so forth. So I've already mentioned the BIL. As I said, went into effect a couple of years ago. It created 12 new programs. This was just one of them. Now, the big thing to notice there is the B's in these numbers. This is big money. The NEVI program was $5 billion with a B that was distributed to the states. Every state in here and every other state in the country got money out of this based on program funding, just like you do for your highway trust fund stuff. But so it ranged from the more populated the state, and the larger the state, the more money they got. California, I think, was the #1 recipient. Texas was second, et cetera, et cetera. But in any case, there was a lot of money. It was distributed on a formula basis. Your state already has this money because they were required to submit a plan last August, and all the states did. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. The second thing, Aaron, that's where you may get involved. This act also included $2.5 billion in grant programs, grants. So, by its inherent nature, that means it's you're writing a grant. You're trying to compete for these dollars. Mike Martin, some of you may know from PennDOT, he's actually been involved in assisting some of the city counties in Pennsylvania in trying to help write grants to apply for this $2.5 billion with a B funding. So it's certainly possible that you guys, as the fleet managers for the DOTs, and I don't think I said this, but the DOTs are the agency that controls this program at the state level. This is mostly, in most DOTs, these are your planner folks. And I know most of you guys probably don't have a lot of interaction with the planners in your DOT, but be aware that they may be calling on you. So that's sort of part and parcel of what this is about. This NEVI program targets creating a system of 500,000 EV chargers by 2023. They've already designated all the corridors. And I guess maybe it's important to say that this BIL program, the whole program, the BIL program, was $1.2 trillion in infrastructure investments, $550 billion for highways and bridges. So again, we struggled to get a transportation bill through Congress, but this one was successful, and this is sort of like Christmas coming. You know it's coming. You got to sometimes adjust to it. I already mentioned this. It's about it's $5 billion over 5 years. I don't know if I said the 5 years, and this is what they're trying to do here is real simple. This whole electric vehicle, alternative fuels, whatever. It's always been about the chicken and the egg. Do you have the vehicles before you have the infrastructure? Do you create the infrastructure before you have the vehicles? The government's here is trying to get off the zero with this, and this bill is about trying to create the infrastructure to support people adopting more electric vehicles. Now, I would say that not all the money in this thing is devoted completely to electric vehicles. There is funding in there for other alternative fuel sources. And of course, I think honestly, like there's a hurricane hitting Florida probably right now. Whatever your personal feelings may be about climate change and other things, there's very little doubt that I think people are giving more attention to the environment, and I think you will see more of instead of dragging their feet for adopting these things, I think you'll see states pushing forward to advance some of this stuff. I'm not saying that you guys in the DOT world, it's not hitting you the day or the next day, but the future's not going to look like the past. That's just maybe the big message. One of the things that this program did, and that's a good link for you to remember there, is driveelectric.gov. This is a new joint program. It's part of the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation. This website is a great clearinghouse for information related to NEVI and related to the state efforts in this site. I know of at least, I've seen Utah, and I think I've seen a couple of the other DOTs that are in this room. I know Utah has already released RFPs for vendors to propose to build out this network. And that's an important thing to remember, that this is it's up to the DOTs to decide how to administer it. That last paragraph on here is sort of the constraints to the program. I already said it was formula-based. The states already have this money now. The only constraints are it requires that there be a 20% match for this, for to get the federal money. Now, this match could be provided by the DOT. The DOT could put its money into it. But in most cases, this is where the competitive part of the program comes from. They'll ask vendors to respond to a proposal to build out these networks, and one of the things is they have to operate it for 5 years. But the feds will give them operating funds to help support that, because they know that from day one, not all these things are going to be economically viable. It's going to take time for the market to catch up. So the feds is providing up to 5 years funding for these efforts, and that private entities are eligible for these funds. That's the reason that I said that the state DOTs, I know, like I say, Utah, I've seen theirs where they actually identify that this the percentage of grant or the percentage of funding that the private sector vendors are willing to put in to their grant program is a strong competitive factor. So in other words, if they got 5 responses to a given proposal or a given RFP, that if one of those was offering to provide a 30% match of their money, that would probably be viewed more favorably than one that had a 15% match. Because the DOT, let's face it, the DOT is not anxious to give its money away from its equipment or its bridges or its highways to fund this program. In most cases, they hope that they can get the private sector to provide that funding. And as a practical matter, it's important to know that when they say build out this charging network, what are they really talking about? I mean, they're literally talking that the vendor is supposed to identify how they're going to locate, which has to be within at least 50 miles of the prior statement. It has to be within at least 1 mile of a designated corridor for this, and that's typically your interstates and your U.S. highways. So it's pretty much your federal aid routes anyway. But the vendor then has to identify how they got to build these charging stations. These charging stations have to meet certain specifications, and they have to operate that thing for at least 5 years. So what it's really is effectively doing is forcing firms to, in most cases, to create a joint venture between firms that their expertise is building or in engineering, and maybe another one firm's expertise is in operating fueling stations like the truck stops and so on. And another firm may be an expert in doing the financing and so on and so forth. So very few, this is really going to be teams of vendors trying to put together these applications for this funding. I've already mentioned that the plans were due from the state in August 22, and every DOT managed to hit this date. Again, this is one of those things that, at least for me, I was shocked that the DOTs, but these are planning folks. They're not in our normal circle of what we tend to work in, and they've been looking for this stuff coming for several years. So most of them already had these plans in place. At this link I've got there, it's at driveelectric.gov. Again, it's that same website I gave before. There's actually a summary of the program for the first year that it's been in place. Of course, we're in August now, and they were submitted in August, so the program's been in place for 1 year, and it summarizes what each state has done with their funds so far, and it also contains a link to that state's plan. So if you want to know what your state's doing, you can go to this website, you can click on it, you can see what your state has been doing so far, and it'll also allow you to get some insight into where your state's plans are going. Not every state is treating it the same way. I've already mentioned, I think that I was talking about Utah, that most of the RFIs, they're really written requests for information for the most part, does suggest that this amount of funding the vendors are willing to offer is probably a strong competitive factor. And this is a situation where I don't guess any of us is really old enough, Dennis and I aren't old enough to remember the back in the 50s when the Eisenhower era of developing the roadways started. In those cases, the DOTs really design the roads, and in some cases, we're involved in the construction. This is the complete antithesis to that approach. Essentially, the DOTs are just the money managers, and they're leaving it to the private sector to develop and propose the solutions. So this is a completely different type of approach. The eligible projects for this, as I say, you can read, hopefully you can read. I'll have to admit the last 2 weeks, I think I've given a lot of eye tests to people because we get these daggone slides up here and you can't read the daggone thing, especially if you're like me and you can't have a hard time figuring out where to get it on your glasses. So in any case, it must be directly related to charging a vehicle. Those must be open to the public. But you see this caveat here is interesting, including multiple commercial contractors. What that means is essentially it's entirely possible that UPS, FedEx, and 2 or 3 other big trucking companies that are located in a given area could apply for one of these fuel boy type situations where it's an unmanned facility and it's right in that area, and they could use it to charge up their own electric vehicles. So that's just I guess a nuance to the thing. And as I already indicated, it must be along a designated alternative fuel corridor, and it's real easy. It's the interstates and the most U.S. highways. Now, some of the guys in this group here, they've had the round 7, what came in 2023. They've been iteratively expanding this thing, and some of your states have been some of the last ones to go there. I'm sure it's not a surprise to you. They're right here in Montana. I can't imagine that, the number, I've done probably 1,500 miles worth of driving in the last 5 days. I'd hate to be having to scrounge around to try to find places to recharge my car. So you got a challenge in the large states, the rural states. This is a challenging thing, and that's why the government wants to build the infrastructure. So if I'm in North Carolina and I want to travel to California, I don't have to sweat blood and run like this just to find charging stations. So they're trying to build the infrastructure to make this viable. There is a lot of other things around this NEVI stuff, and some of the discussion, I know Bob Myers from Caltrans tomorrow is going to be talking about it a little bit. Not surprising, California is one of the national leaders in this area. They've been dealing with air quality for a long time, and they've in most cases, several years ahead of the rest of the nation. But what we are finding, and I've had a couple, 3 people tell me this already, is that the electrical system in some states is simply, not up to being able to provide this power to all these charging stations. So that's part of the money that's going to be spent by the feds, is to try to upgrade the infrastructure to support the ability to provide this demand. There's also the idea of how you're going to integrate this to the vehicles. The charging ports. This has been a highly quickly evolving question of which port design. I think some of you all probably saw, like me, that is recently in the last 2-3 weeks that Ford and I think a couple of the other large OEMs have decided to adopt the Tesla charging system because they simply have the broadest network built out currently and the most high-powered chargers available. So they're sort of throwing their hat in with those, but most of these charging entities have been private sector based, ChargePoint, and I can't remember what the other ones are, but forget that, it's neither here nor there. They're wanting to make sure that there's smart charge management. Again, what that really means is, if you've heard any presentations whatsoever about electric vehicles, one of the real problems is that the way electric utilities bill customers is on the basis of how much energy they used at what times. They basically bill you on peak demand, and if you're doing and when peak demand generally is the highest, rates are the highest. So that's typically during the daytime. So the bottom line is, if you can't charge at night and you're having to charge in the daytime, it can be pretty darn expensive proposition. In fact, I saw some, what would you call it, UK studies recently that said that If you try to make a road trip and you have to charge your car exclusively during the daytime, that the cost is almost a wash with traditional gasoline vehicles. If you're able to charge at night when the electric rates are low, big savings. So that's some of this smart charge management to get around it. Renewable, they're also obviously trying to figure out ways to generate as much of this electrical power from renewable sources as possible. Now, I guess going back to my previous point, I've actually saw something that's been fairly interesting recently. Some of you all may say it as well, is that there are some, with the Priuses, for instance, that's the hybrid. It's had, been the most successful and been out the longest. What they're finding is one way to try to get around this demand charging issue is they're taking batteries out of these earlier electric cars that still, they're not up to snuff to operate at 100%, but they're still able to operate at 75% or 60%. They're actually building banks of these things that if they're able to charge up during the nights when the electricity is cheap, and then actually supply that electricity during the day, draw from those battery things. That's sort of the approaches that we got to get inventive around to try to make this a viable concept. In the DOT world, you could easily do the same kind of a thing at some point in the future when you have this need. Is just electrical storage is a way to get around some of the constraints of the time that you're needing to charge this information. And like I say, the market is evolving in terms of power levels and charging speeds. I heard some folks in this room talking about some recent releases about, I think it was Toyota that's who was that was commenting on the Toyota had a press release about they've got a battery in 10 minutes. They can accept like 800 watt amps, and they can recharge in 10 minutes and so on and so forth. You're going to see these continuing developments go along to change a lot of this stuff. So that's the reason I say what I'm telling you today is a bit of a snapshot in time on a fast moving effort. So it's just trying to get you a little familiar with some of this stuff. You're certainly not going to attempt to try to tell you everything you need to know in this presentation. This is some of the objectives in the NEVI information. I've already, I think, covered all those. The one I didn't really mention was that the grant requirements include that you've got to have at least 4 150 kilowatt DC fast chargers. That's the ones that allow you to recharge a standard a Tesla or whatever electric vehicle. Most of them in 15 to 30 minutes, and make it a much more viable comparison with the traditionally fueled vehicles. This one is an eye test. I doubt I certainly couldn't pass it, me standing right behind it. But the point of this thing is to simply say that to make people aware that there are lots of programs where the feds have grants available or other fundings available that are available to different kinds of entities. This law, though, does say that no matter how many of these things you use, the feds are not going to pay more than 80%. So if you're already getting 2 or 3 of these things and you go after this NEVI money, you still can't get more than 50% of your funding from the feds. That's the real point of this slide, is it just to show that, like I say, if I'm anyway, I think I made my point there. You can't get 200% funding from the feds. They're going to cap it out at 80 regardless. There is this is again an evolving subject. As of a year ago, every one of the private sector charging networks had their own payment system that didn't talk to each other. So if you were in the part of the world that had like I say, ChargePoint, that required its own little car, and if you went to an area where ChargePoint wasn't, but one of the other ones, I think EasyGo, is one of the other ones, that you had to have a different card. Well, for state agencies, that's a pain. So the long and short of it is the feds are mandating that these providers come up with a common platform so the user can have one form of payment. So they're trying to get around one of the early problems they've had with this thing. Again, this is a evolving technology. You know, the gasoline people and the diesel people have had 50 years to get all this stuff figured out. So they're doing this quickly. The NEVI does establish minimum standards for charger installations, operations, and maintenance by qualified techs. In other words, what we're saying here is the feds don't want these people sticking these things up and just letting any yahoo get out there and start working on a thing, get electrocuted at the charger station. So they've got minimum requirements. If you're going to install these things, and the people that work on them have to meet certain minimum requirements. And I already think I mentioned they were to support the smart charge thing. There will be an update. Again, this is sort of the planning folks, but there's going to be an update to the MUTCD. I'm sure you guys probably know more about that than I do. I just know that that exists and it is a federal standard. But they're going to update the MUTCD to reflect all these requirements. And they're going to establish data collection submission requirements. Like, you know, feds doesn't give money away that there's not some strings, and this is the case here too. There's you know, they're going to actually require certain data out of the states and the vendors to make sure that they're getting what they wanted out of this thing. Impacts to DOT fleets. This is for you guys. Nothing. No direct impact today. I said at least I know of at least one DOT. I'd be curious to see if anybody else in this room where the fleet manager was asked to help assist in developing a grant for the discretionary funding at $2.5 billion. That falls into the second point. I guess I'd stop. Have any of you folks in this room been involved or been approached or had anybody asked you anything about NEVI related stuff? Okay, Brad has. So what have they asked you, what have you been involved in, Brad?
Involving adding charging stations in a joint public and private cooperative venture, and we're trying to locate those. I mean, Alaska, it's spread out, but the same as the rest of the states here. Using DOT property to provide that location for infrastructure. And what we found is there's very, very little interest in doing that and having something that the DOT could use inside the gate, so to speak, but it also be available to the public outside the gate. And we did not get very far with that before we figured out there are very few crossover possibilities.
And like I said, that is the nature of an evolving issue. You know, I will say that I actually, sort of not my thing, but I guess tangentially I'm aware that there's been lots of discussions with within Congress about the use of rest areas. You know, rest areas have all kinds of constraints about what can and can't be in a rest area, but there's an obvious idea that, heck, you've got the place, you've got land, why don't we have charging stations? That may change. They may free up some of the right-of-way on public right-of-way for this purpose. But you might imagine if you got you know, the gas and diesel providers probably cry foul if all of a sudden you got electric vehicles and you can charge them for free at a public rest area versus, you know, you got to go drive off the road. So there's got all those kinds of things. But I'm glad. Thank you for offering up that, Brad. It's, like I say, it's evolving. I'm not at all surprised that in a state like Alaska, and I would suspect that here in Montana, so you guys are sort of the DOT is the big dog. It's the biggest state agency, or the next to biggest. You guys have special expertise in this area that's not very widely available. So just don't be shocked if you don't get drug into this, whether you like it or not. I think one thing that is interesting, there is funding in this program. It's separate, but it's got its own little path for school bus and transit fleets. Now, let's face it, the school bus fleet just intuitively, and transit fleets are a wonderful application for this kind of technology. School bus fleets go out in the morning, return to the barn middle of the day, go back out in the afternoon. This is going like gangbusters in the school bus industry. There's already several manufacturers that are producing these units, and these school systems are going as hard as they can, especially back east, as you might imagine. The routes tend to be shorter anyway, and more people. So I mentioned this 2.5, that's where the grant writing comes from. And we've already seen that local municipalities, I know here in North Carolina where I live, the city of Charlotte has had its own mandates that are well beyond what the DOT or what the US DOT, the feds are requiring, or even the state. So what I'm pointing out is that this is not all 2030. Like in Charlotte, I think they've said they want to be carbon neutral by 2025 or 20 something. The bottom line, the point really is that, especially in some of the cities, that they're trying to move faster than the feds are requiring. So again, it could get you guys involved. Other comments, let's face it, the reality is most of the EV offerings currently are in the Class 1 market, your people movers. But it is, I'm sure all of you have seen, I wasn't here for the Volvo presentation, but, all the OEMs are developing products of some sort. They're just at various points. I know I think sort of the Class 3 to 5 market may be the ones that sort of you start seeing some viable product offerings there that are more generally available. I know Dennis can speak to this possibly, but in Europe, there is usual, Europe's ahead of us in a lot of these areas, so a lot of that technology is already in use or is further towards being in use, and we'll likely be a lot of those vehicles will be ones that were developed in Europe and be adapted for the U.S. market. Near-term trends are likely, and this is something that we're actually having a workshop in January at TRB. I think I mentioned it the other day. We know that, here we are today, and here's where we're going to be 20 years. Somewhere between there, there's going to be some kind of interim solutions to these things. Some of the things I've seen, and I didn't see any vendors here, but I know I saw it in Orlando last spring or last summer. People who have battery packs that allow you to operate your hydraulic systems with your engine turned off, so you can run a bucket truck or run a scissor lift or some other thing that would, I call it transitional technologies. I think we'll see lots of transitional technologies, and there'll be certain types of equipment that's clearly pretty obvious that it would make sense to electrify. I know one that came to mind for me was sweepers. Sweepers live in the worst environment possible. It's full of dust and dirt. You can't keep the daggone filters clean. So electric sweeper, you don't have to worry about that stuff. It doesn't pull any air or anything in there. I think there's already some electric sweepers on the market, but you'll see some of those applications. As that equipment comes to the market, a lot of it may even be in off-road applications. You'll see that will help move along some of the other technologies. Acquiring EVs is the easiest part of the implementation challenge. I know some of you have been waiting on Lightnings for 2 years and so on and so forth, but I'm here to tell you, at least back in North Carolina, I can tell you this, the lots are full of electric vehicles. They're available. Some of the initial buyers, some of the initial interest has sort of waned. And I was looking at the Ford lot the other day in Greensboro, and I counted, I think it was 20 Mustang Marquees. So if I was wanting a deal on a car, I could probably cut me a deal on a Mustang Marquee if I wanted to. So long and short of that, this situation, that you still do have a pretty good number of product offerings in the Class 1. But the other part of the shoe on this statement is that getting those vehicles is a lot easier than trying to get the charging installations installed, especially if it's going to require any significant change in from the utility. Like, for instance, I know the city of Charlotte again. I know the fleet manager there. That's the reason I like to quote on them. And down there, they actually said they're going to have to build a new power substation there at his fleet lot, because the city really is wanting him to transition his people mover fleet, including the police department, I mean, like next 2 years. And they're going to have to pull so much electrical capacity in, it's going to require a substation. And you might imagine, I don't know how many of you guys have been involved with trying to get utilities even relocated in the DOT world. Those utilities don't move fast for nothing. So it may take you 2-3 years to get them to move on something. And these things here, some of them are better prepared than others. We're lucky in down south, quite frankly, that the textile industry was a huge electrical producer, and it's dead, it's gone. So a lot of the southern utilities have plenty of excess power available. But that's not true in lots of areas. California, already got rolling brownouts when it gets tough. So anyway, the long and short of it is that advanced planning for having the power available to even build your charging stations, that tends to be the critical path for trying to really get electric vehicles adopted and in place. And like I say here, this is to that point, even here in Montana, there are applications for electric vehicles today. Not every vehicle you have goes 500 miles a day or goes from goes out and stays out and doesn't come back to the barn. One of the things ways you adopt these fleets is you look at how they're used and who uses them. And not every application, especially now, can do that, but there are applications that can. So you have to just do a little bit of planning around this, identify, and then there's even the thing, like I say, where do I have maybe already got good electrical supply at this shop location? Maybe we put the chargers there. Maybe we base some electric vehicles there. This one I don't, so maybe that's not as good a choice. Anyway, and you need to consider those supply needs, and I've already mentioned this last thing. So with that being said, that's the end of my presentation. Like I say, this is very different from the other ones where I think I had we talked about some practical tools that you guys could apply immediately. This is more informational, and hopefully this will sort of maybe provide a little background for the discussions tomorrow. This is not my area of expertise. I sort of told you 99% of everything I know about this, but I'd be happy to try to field any questions if you have them. Anybody have any questions? I guess, how are we on time? I think we still probably have a fair bit of time. Let me pontificate a little bit if I can. What I was just going to say is this is not Mont McDonald talking. This is not the feds talking. This is Henry Canipe talking. I will tell you that privately, within Mont McDonald, which is a big energy company, I have had discussions with folks in our energy practices about, for the DOTs, what does all this really mean? What do you guys think? They said, that nobody has a crystal ball, but said, right now, battery capacity is the constraints. And he said the current technology on batteries, their energy density, that was the term he used, energy density. How much energy can they carry? They said it's still well behind what the energy density of gasoline or diesel is. And he said that's at the heart of the problem. But he said in the DOT world, where you guys have got an emergency response mission, where you potentially have to run vehicles 24/7, that there's really not an opportunity to really have equipment down for significant amounts of times. He said, I suspect that you guys are probably not. There will be electric uses for people movers. You will have certain other applications for electric, and as the technology develops, who really knows? The fuel cell, but he said, fuel cells are out there. That is still very expensive. There's still lots of questions around it. The fuel cells are simply a way of generating electricity themselves. You can directly power vehicles by hydrogen, for instance, but we've had some discussions, privately. I've heard people talking about hydrogen by itself as a cryogenic fuel, which means it requires a lot of special handling because you can really get people hurt pretty quickly with it. It's highly explosive. But hey, let's face it. I mean, it's not like gasoline won't explode on you in situations. I was hauling a propane tank in the back of my car to get a grill, for my grill the other day. Propane's is some of these bombers have been using propane, so it's not like that. There's other things that we deal with that don't have the risk anyway. But he did say that, he said, in the long term, I do feel like that, it's probably going to be fuel cell technology that would meet the needs of a DOT. He said, there right now, you've probably seen articles where they're looking at, like, I think the one that caught my eye was that you can convert hydrogen out of ammonia pretty easily. Ammonia can be transferred at room temperature in a liquid form. Ammonia has some of its own risk associated with it too, but again, they're manageable. Heck, you probably got ammonia in your house somewhere right now. But in any event, I think that, those kind of applications do seem to have a more long-term promise for being able to meet I call your core fleet, your plow trucks and so on and so forth. But who knows? It's just that the electric vehicles have gotten a lot more attention in the near term, and I actually do applaud it. At least we're trying to take first step in some direction. Again, this is nothing for you to take home or write about. I thought it provided a little bit of insight, at least to me, that of where the future might mean for you guys. I mean, we have seen. I don't know if any of you saw it, but New York City went through their first winter with trying to use electric vehicles as plow vehicles, and it was a pretty miserable outcome. They found out between the cold, the cold weather sapping strength out of the electrical vehicles, that just like some of the reports you've probably seen on the lightning pickups, that when you actually in real life conditions and when you were towing with them, the range really dropped tremendously. So, the operating temperature range, batteries don't really like it much below, say, 30, 45 degrees, and they really don't like it much above 90 degrees. Either which way, you start losing capacity. And so that doesn't sound like a good recipe for moving snow, and New York tried it last year. But hey, everything's, got to crawl before you walk. So, Dennis, I see you have your hand up. Anything you would like to add? Well, I think maybe one of the major points from what Dennis was saying is anytime you make a big broad brush statement about things, it's never true in specifics. I would be curious with the you folks. I assume does every DOT here have at least a few electric vehicles for flow? You don't have any? Anybody? None of you guys? Well, that's pretty amazing to me. I know at North Carolina they've got a pretty good sized fleet of EVs, but the like I said, the population density and yeah, and that's
That's all true and fine and all, but what we're finding out is, well, great, we can get the vehicles, great, we can get the chargers, but now you start putting chargers at barns that consume more energy than the entire barn takes. And you can't legislate that, it's not your fingers, you say you shall, because you can shall if you want to, and have miles of money in that way.
Unfortunately, that's how rain upon you, legislation to declare it. That's environmental, and that's how it comes.
I guess the last thing, and I'll get down now. I am curious. Does any of you guys have any of the Lightning pickups? I was just okay. Tell us about have you had them long? What have been your experience with them?
We got the first couple in the winter. They were absolutely dismal in cold weather. Hour and a half, 2 hour charging at 150 or 200 kilowatt charging station to gain 90 miles range on the dashboard that equated to about 50 actual miles. They've been working pretty well in the summer. Same thing, Volkswagen ID4 operated very similarly. Hates cold weather. Does pretty good in Washington, it's not super hot in the summer. It's a challenge. Infrastructure is a challenge. We're trying to get approval through our Secretary of Transportation to buy some Teslas because the infrastructure already exists, so that will help us with range anxiety issues, but there's some perception issues around Tesla, and there's some political issues around Tesla because Elon Musk is not necessarily liked in rural states like Washington. So hopefully that won't be a factor, but we're getting closer. We haven't been told no, but we haven't been told yes.
Anybody else have a experience to share?
I drive one, so,
Do you?
yeah. So I've got probably 14,000 miles on it when I'm driving. Same thing like you said, in the winter, it's 220. It's, in summer, I'm getting 320 to 339. So a 35% drop in the winter time. There's things you can use to mitigate it, like conditioning the cab, while it's still plugged in. Gives you a little bit, but, anything helps in the winter. Some of we've struggled getting charging in, and we'll talk a lot about that tomorrow too. Getting enough charging in to support it. There's a lot of charging local, but back like, I think you're talking about the standardized cards. There's plenty of charging available in our state, but our card doesn't work on all those stations, which makes it a problem. And that's some of the challenges that we've got to work through. So to mitigate that, we're trying to put more on our property rather than depending on some existing charging. So, it's kind of something you guys do what good tests. But other than that, the trucks work pretty good. A lot of it depends on the speeds. If you're on the highway speeds a lot, it just sucks. If I'm running around the Denver Metro, I'm doing great. I spend a lot of time on the highway with commute. So that's kind of what I think see with it.
Thank you, Howard. Like I say, it is interesting to hear those use cases, I call it. I will say that I looked at an EV recently. I probably could live with it. In my area, we got mild climates. We don't have that hard winter and so on and so forth. But one of the things I did notice, I was looking at a Hyundai Ioniq, I think it's called. And one of the things that was interesting about it was that, it doesn't use resistive heat technology. It has a heat pump, just like your heat pump at home. It's got an electrically driven heat pump that it generates the air, AC, or the heat for the system, and it's supposed to reduce the, compared to the resistive heat, like an old baseboard heater, the resistive heat, it's supposed to reduce the energy consumption to heat or cool the vehicle by like 20–25%. Of course, cooling, I take that back, is sort of a wash, but on heating, it's supposed to reduce a lot of the current drain to try to heat the vehicle. And that sort of makes sense. Anybody that has a heat pump in their house, they're pretty darn efficient. Like that, they may not run you out of the place with heat, but they are at least pretty efficient. Well, anyway, I've filled enough time, I think. I do appreciate you folks' patience. I will tell you that I am going to be heading out here probably early afternoon, and do want to tell you all it's been a pleasure to be with you. I was thinking last night, I think I've been to every Washima conference for at least the last 10 years and maybe the last 15. And it's always been, you folks I've always enjoyed coming to the Western group. You guys are a tight-knit group, and it's always been a pleasure. So in any case, I hope to see you again maybe next year in Colorado. We'll see. But anyway, thanks a lot.